We consider ourselves very fortunate to have property on the Oregon coast. We have one of our grandkids' dogs staying with us right now, and he's looking out the window, and he likes what he can see out the window. An old raccoon makes his daily journey across our lawn every single day. Sniffing and looking, he makes his way from one end of the lawn to the other. He's looking for most anything that's edible. And then an old coyote makes his journey across our lawn, sniffing around, looking for a mouse or whatever he might be lucky enough to find. He and the raccoon might eat somewhat the same things at certain times. With our property right in the edge of a big woods, we see lots of different types of animals come across our lawn. And one that we really enjoy seeing, and that's really a beauty, is a herd of elk. This happens to be the Roosevelt elk, which are slightly larger usually than the Rocky Mountain elk, and a large bull can stand about 5 feet at the shoulders and weigh about 600 pounds. The cows are a bit smaller, but still an impressive animal. Around our place, the bugling of the bulls is not uncommon during the rutting season, where they scream and fight for their harem. Teddy Roosevelt planted some Rocky Mountain elk on the Coast Range, but it's thought that they may not have had much, if any, influence on the herds of the Roosevelt elk on the Coast Range. The males or bulls are the only ones that have antlers. The cows or females have no antlers. The cows will be having young pretty well in a few months, and the young are spotted like a deer fawn, and they usually have one or sometimes two young, which they nurse for quite a little while. The elk were at one time an open country animal. They grazed in meadows and out in the open country. They're more a grazer than deer. Deer are more like a browsing animal. But then when hunting pressure started happening, when the whites came and had good hunting equipment, then they moved into the timber and mountains. And so nowadays people think of them as an animal in the timber, but they still love to get out in an open spot where there's some nice green grass and graze. We've decided to get in our vehicle and drive up to a game refuge called Jewell Wildlife Refuge on the northern Oregon coast. They have some meadows there where the elk come, and even when it's rough weather, they feed them hay. They've bought some old farms up here where they have lots of room for them to roam, and these elk have become quite gentle. Sometimes when there's snow on or at certain times of the year, they will feed them hay. That's just to encourage them to stick around. So we're going to go down to one of the viewing areas and look and see if we can find some elk out there in this wildlife refuge. We pass the large old house, which is the refuge headquarters, and drive down in a paved parking lot where there's a viewing area. And this is a really nice spot to watch them during the rut. And these bulls are very active and very aggressive when they're in the rut and very vocal. It's a sight to see. But today it's raining and the rut is long since over, so the bulls are laying there just as peaceful as little kittens right with the cow. This little group laying right here, there's one small bull. He's called a spike. He just has one single antler going up that hasn't forked yet. But his next year probably he'll get a fork on it. And then from then on, he might get one fork per year, but not necessarily. Sometimes they'll get several points on their antlers, and then when they get older, they'll revert back to where they only maybe have 2 points on it. But that's when they get extremely old. And these antlers are shed each year, and some of those antlers can grow to be a very huge size. The bulls have such huge antlers that you would think they'd have trouble getting through the brush, but they just tilt their old heads back and run right through the brush. And they're very active and very agile, and they can jump and run like crazy. The younger bulls usually stay with the cows till they get several years old, and they will be laying here with the cows, where the big, massive, older bulls will be off by themselves in the woods, with the exception of during the rut. And during the rut, they're very active and they're running all over the place and fighting each other all the time. There's a very soaking light drizzle today, but we decided to go anyway. If we wait till a sunny day on the Oregon coast, you might not get that for a few days. And anyway, we were ready to go now, and so we have been on the coast long enough. We've learned to do things in the rain. The rain doesn't seem to be affecting these elk. They have a special way they hold their ears when it rains, just so the rain won't rain in. And they're laying here chewing on their cuds, as peaceful as could be. And these elk have a tendency to be lighter colored than the Rocky Mountain. So an albino elk isn't uncommon to find here. Usually there's one or so in the herd here, although I looked considerably, sorted through these elk considerably, and didn't see one, but I did see some cute little bulls. The deer are considered to be more of a browser than elks. That means they they like to eat on brush and things, where elk are more for grazing in meadows and eating lots of grass. These bulls that are laying here have smaller antlers. They're younger bulls, but still impressive animals. While the Rocky Mountain elk, that would be, they start on the eastern side of Oregon and go through the Great Plains. And they're more for migrating than these Roosevelt elk. They're not that much on migrating. They pretty much stay where they are. In this meadow where they're all laying in the fall, it becomes a flurry of activity with all the bulls bugling and running the cows all around and chasing each other, and they're really active and very aggressive at it and shove each other around with those huge antlers like they were nothing. The Roosevelt elk have a tendency to have more points on their antlers than the Rocky Mountain elk, and so they're a real desired trophy amongst trophy hunters. The meat of these animals is considered second to none. They're one of our better eaten game animals, and they have just totally adapted to the rain that's around them. Once in a while, one will stand up and shake the water off from them, although I don't imagine their skin's getting wet due to their heavy coats of hair, and they can stay extremely warm even in the nastiest of temperatures due to that heavy coat they sport. The old bull, he's just laying there being a nice bull, while some of the cows are chewing their cuds and just looking around, and they all have their ears held so that rain won't rain down in their ears. The elk are more of an open country animal, so they're not in the brush that much, although since hunting has started to happen and so many people have taken over some of their habitat, they've moved back in the timber quite a bit. And although we can see the elk, they're quite visible here, they're just almost everywhere over here on the coast. Due to recent clear-cut logging activity, it's cleared out a lot of places where the elk have moved in, where they wouldn't necessarily be. But back when the early settlers first came here, they found the elk in the Willamette Valley and a lot of the open areas around western Oregon. The Native Americans valued these elk immensely, and they liked their antlers. Those antlers worked well to make tools and different things they needed around their camps. When Lewis and Clark first came over, their hunters went out and shot some elk, and these elk had every elk they shot almost had tiny little stone points in them. The bow and arrows that they used, although they were quite good, weren't really powerful enough for the elk, and so they just shot a bunch of points into them. And Lewis and Clark had firearms, so they were able to harvest the elk with no real problem. Lewis and Clark's crew became quite bored at eating wild game only, and so the Indians had a bunch of dogs, and they just laid around their camp, and they really didn't use them for much of anything other than just pets. So Lewis and Clark traded for some of these dogs and ate them, and they said it was sure good to have some really good meat in camp again. But I'll take the elk any day myself. I expect the coastal Indians not only harvested elk and bull elk for their antlers, which they could make all sorts of tools out of, but they probably hunted for the antlers that are shed off these elk every year, and then they could put them to good use making tools of them. When I worked as a park ranger, there were numerous places around the park where the ocean had eroded the bank away and exposed old Indian village sites, and there were lots of elk bone in the sites, along with lots of clam shells and snail shells and things they were eating that they tossed out in their kitchen middens.
Roosevelt elk are one of two subspecies of elk found in Oregon, with an estimated population of 59,000 in the state. Rosies are darker in color than other elk subspecies and the largest in terms of body size, with bulls generally weighing 700 to 1 8,100 pounds. Roosevelt elk occupy most of western Oregon, with concentrations in the Cascades and Coast Ranges. All elk west of Highway 97 are considered to be Roosevelt elk, though there is some overlap of Oregon's two subspecies in the Cascades.
Go.
The rut usually occurs early September in the Roosevelt elk to early October. There have been some bulls that begin to form a herd in as early as August. During the rut, a male elk, will form a herd of cows, female elk.
During the rut, there's a case or two where a young Roosevelt bull would gather him up a harem of dairy cows on a dairy farm and put them in a herd and herd them around just like they were cow elk.
An elk bull harem typically consists of 15 to 20 cows, but may consist of as many as 30. Only prime mature bulls have large harems. By mid October, the rut ends and the mature bulls resume their solitary ways. The cows reform the herd, joined by the spiked and young bulls. Come winter, the herd migrates to their winter range. The older bulls often do not migrate.
Go.
Elk are the second largest member of the deer family, moose being the largest. Welcome to Jewell Meadows Wildlife Area, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Elk can usually always be seen around the Jewell Meadows Wildlife Area, and plus various other places around like Cannon Beach and around Seaside area. You'll always see elk usually, and sometimes people are feeding them in their backyards. These elk at Jewell Meadows Wildlife Refuge are wild elk, and there are about 200 of them that hang out in the refuge, and their houses right around the edge of the refuge where you've got a panoramic view of the elk and the majestic bulls during the rut when they're shoving each other around. The house ahead of us must be elk lovers. They even have a large deck where you can sit and watch the majestic bulls shove each other around during the rut. There are signs to let you know when you're in the refuge, and plenty of signs. Cautions. So
Jewell Meadows. Jewell Meadows.
The whole time we were soaking wet, as well as the elk were too, but they can deal with it better than us. It's a very interesting and scenic drive up around the Jewell area, and there's scads of interesting little logging towns. Since this was once a big logging place, the little towns, some of them still exist with their very small little houses where the loggers lived. I hope you've enjoyed this, and thanks for watching. And please subscribe. We definitely need subscribers.